Hello. On my last video, a viewer asked if I could go into detail about the time I had to take a consent course. I figured this was a good idea because when you hear about how these courses work, it sometimes sounds exaggerated or even completely made up, especially to someone who doesn't follow the discussion. So I'm going to just simply go through my experience in a relatively neutral and opinion-free manner. As I've already spoken my opinion on consent courses in general in my previous video, there's no need for me to go in depth on that matter here. Keep in mind that this was an hour-long course I took like 3 years ago, before I developed even a passing interest in social issues, so my recollection of the event will not be complete and it likely won't be perfect either. So my high school was set up so that the year was divided into 4 marking periods. For 3 marking periods per year, the students took physical education, which is basically just to get us off our lazy asses for an hour. There was 1 marking period in which the students took a health course, with a different focus for each grade. The health class for seniors was focused on adulthood and the difficulties associated with it. This was the year that we had to do the now cliché flower baby project. We also had a lovely recap of the freshman year STD lessons, but you get the idea. It was designed so that we wouldn't be entering our lives after high school completely blind. So one day we had a pair of speakers, a man and a woman, come in and put on a presentation in lieu of regular class. I don't remember what they titled it, but it was a consent course. There were 2 main parts to the event. They taught us about laws regarding rape and consent in New Jersey, and they talked about rape itself. Now, regarding the legal aspects, they actually did a really good job explaining how my state's consent laws worked. And I did leave with a full understanding of what is legal and what isn't. Just in case anyone is curious about our laws, I'll give a quick explanation. The New Jersey age of consent is 16 years old. For sexual relationships with figures of direct authority, such as teachers and coaches, the age of consent is increased to 18, though it's not treated the same as rape or generic sex with a minor. There is also a provision that allows for legal sex under the age of 16 with somebody under the age of 16, and as young as 12, as long as both are within 2 years age difference of each other. So a 14-year-old could legally have sex with anyone aged 12 to 16. The age of consent is also raised to 18 if you cross state lines or bring somebody across state lines with the intention of having sex with them. And, as is the case in many areas, intoxication, be it via alcohol or drugs, nullifies consent. Now, the piece of legislature is written to be gender neutral, and as the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, in essence, says that the law cannot treat one person differently from another person in similar circumstances, meaning that any laws that explicitly affect people differently based on race, gender, sexuality, or anything else are technically unconstitutional, which results in a lot of U.S. laws being gender neutral, in their wording at least. That being said, the presenters did kind of describe rape and sexual assault as a thing that is done by men to women. So, as I said, they actually explained the legal side of rape and the age of consent very well. After they went over all these matters, they were a little more personal. They told a few stories, presumably true, about rape scenarios. They talked about a college-aged man who would date women and act like a total gentleman before he would aggressively rape them in the bathroom. He would then resume acting like a gentleman. They also told a very generic-sounding story about a woman who was date-raped with roofies. I'm sorry I can't be more specific, but as I mentioned, this was years ago, and I don't really remember it too well. But there's one thing I do remember crystal clear about this presentation. The man told my class to think about all the men and boys we knew. Every one of them is a potential rapist. No matter what we think we know, they might be somebody completely different. Now, I'm not going to dignify that statement with a proper response. I'm just going to say that as a male who was primarily raised by a single father, I was offended. And I don't get offended. Ever. Moving on, that last 15 minutes or so was dedicated to a Q&A. To the best of my memory, every question was regarding legality. There were some questions about the severity of certain offenses, whether a particular scenario would be legal, that kind of thing. So I decided to ask a question because I was curious about something. I asked what would happen if a man and a woman mutually decided to have sex later in the day. Then they went out and got equally drunk, and then had sex while still intoxicated as they had agreed earlier. I thought, and still think this is a valid point. While the sex act took place while drunk, consent was established while sober, and both were willing participants in the act. They said in that scenario the man would be a rapist. Now, to be fair, they acknowledged that as common sense dictated that there wasn't realistically a lack of consent, it was highly unlikely that any problems would arise for either of them, and there was no moral wrongdoing. But they said that in the eyes of the law, the man is the rapist, and they have previously emphasized that the law does not work in terms of common sense, but in semantics and technicalities. Even then, before I had read any arguments on the topic, before I even cared to be informed in the discussion, all I could think in my head was bullshit. If both parties were equally drunk, how could the responsibility for the sexual encounter be put on the man but not on the woman? That bugged me, but shortly after, the bell rang and I went on with my day. So that's my experience with a consent course. It wasn't quite as Orwellian as some cases I've heard about, but it was enough that when I think back to it, I wonder how it was that there were no alarm bells going off in my head telling me that what they were saying was inherently unjust. I bet if I had gone home and told my dad what had been said to me, especially the part of us all being potential rapists, he'd have had a serious problem and may have even complained to the school. I certainly would have if I were in that position. If I were a parent, nothing would piss me off more than if somebody told my child that they were, by nature, a terrible person, or they had to remain constantly vigilant in order to not do terrible things. Now, I don't believe that the course had a particularly negative effect on me. It was just some more bullshit that the school put us through. It was like every assembly I ever had to attend. I sat through it and forgot about it a week later. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story, or at least found it informative. As always, I welcome any comments, criticism, and questions you may have, so please comment away. And of course, thanks for watching.